The Awakening. Admiral Keeks Thor had lived through 3 galactic wars, 2 cosmic anomalies, and one particularly disastrous first contact ceremony involving a species that communicated through interpretive crystalline resonance. Yet nothing in his extensive career had prepared him for the sight before him, a quantum anomaly that defied the very laws of physics themselves. The purple-black mass swirled on his quantum display like a living thing, its tendrils reaching out to consume everything in their path. The sight sent a primordial shiver down his spine, causing his scales to ripple in waves of anxious blue-green. "Lieutenant Vor," he called out, his 4 auditory canals picking up the slight tremor in his own voice. Status update. The lieutenant's nerve filaments twitched rapidly, a clear sign of distress among their species. "The anomaly's acceleration continues to defy our predictions, sir. At current velocity, it will reach the Centauri cluster in 72 cycles." Keeks Thor's scaled hands gripped the command station tighter. The Centauri cluster. 12 billion souls spread across 7 systems. The jewel of the Galactic Council's territory. And now, potentially, its tomb. "Show me the projection matrix," he ordered, his cranial frills extending fully as he studied the holographic display that materialized before him. The mathematics were elegant in their horror, a perfect spiral of destruction that would consume not just the Centauri cluster, but eventually, if left unchecked, the entire galaxy. The command center of Heaven's Reach station hummed with nervous energy as various species worked at their stations. Crystalline Vexor analysts clicked and chimed to each other in their native tongue. Hellion observers, their gas-based forms swirling in agitation, pulsed with worried lights. Even the typically stoic election officers, with their tentacled appendages and legendary emotional control, showed signs of concern. "Sir," Lieutenant Vor spoke again, his nerve filaments now practically vibrating. "The Council, they're requesting immediate updates. They want to know our containment strategy." Containment strategy. The words felt hollow. How do you contain something that breaks the very laws of physics? The Galactic Council, for all its 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge, had never seen anything like this. They had mastered faster-than-light travel, learned to harness the power of dying stars, even discovered how to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. But this was different. Keeks Thor's secondary hearts began beating faster as he came to a decision. "Send word to the Council. All of them." He paused, his mandibles clicking in what his species recognized as resigned determination. "Even the humans." The command center fell silent. Even mentioning humanity, the newest and most controversial addition to the Galactic Council, was enough to draw stares. Humans, barely a century into their spacefaring age, they'd stumbled onto the galactic stage like children discovering their parents' formal dinner party. They asked uncomfortable questions, broke established protocols, and seemed to have an almost pathological need to push boundaries that had stood for millennia. "Sir," Vor began, his voice wavering, "the humans are barely more advanced than the Proxima colonies. Their technology is primitive by Council standards. What could they possibly? They're the only species mad enough to have experimented with quantum tunneling." Keeks Thor cut him off, his cranial frills flaring with authority. "And right now, I don't care if they eat with their hands or think faster-than-light travel is exciting. We need every mind working on this." The next few moments passed in a blur of activity. Emergency broadcasts, quantum entanglement communications, and faster-than-light messages all carrying the same desperate plea, "Help us understand what we're facing." The response came faster than anyone expected. A human vessel, breaking every known protocol, jumped directly into high orbit around Heaven's Reach station. By Council standards, their ship looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and determination, a reflection of humanity's tendency to favor function over form. "Sir," one of the sensor operators called out, their secondary eyes blinking rapidly in confusion. "The human vessel, they're requesting immediate audience. They say." The operator paused, mandibles clicking in disbelief. "They say they've seen this before. Keeks Thor's head snapped up so fast his ceremonial neck chains rattled. They what? Their commander, someone named Blake Rodriguez, claims their deep space probes encountered a similar phenomenon 6 months ago in unexplored space. They've been studying it. For the first time since the crisis began, Keeks Thor felt something dangerous stir in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like hope. He straightened to his full height, his scales shifting to a more authoritative shade of deep blue. "Clear my schedule," he ordered, already moving toward the diplomatic chambers. "And someone find out what humans drink. I have a feeling this is going to be a long conversation." As he walked through the station's corridors, Keeks Thor couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. The Galactic Council had spent decades debating whether humanity was ready for membership, whether they could be trusted with advanced technology, whether their inclusion would destabilize millennia of carefully maintained order. Now, facing a threat that defied understanding, they were turning to these same, primitive, humans for help. Perhaps, he thought, his scales rippling with amusement, the universe had a sense of humor after all. The diplomatic chamber's doors loomed before him, their ancient symbols representing unity and cooperation among the stars. As they slid open with a soft hiss, Keeks Thor straightened his ceremonial chains and prepared to meet Commander Blake Rodriguez. He had a feeling the galaxy was about to change forever. The human factor. Commander Blake Rodriguez stood in the diplomatic chamber of Heaven's Reach station, trying not to fidget with his uniform collar. The room itself was a marvel of alien architecture, a perfect fusion of form and function that made Earth's most impressive structures look like children's building blocks in comparison. The walls seemed to breathe with bioluminescent patterns, and the ceiling opened to a view of the galaxy that made his heart ache with its beauty. But it wasn't the architecture that commanded his attention. It was the beings before him, the most powerful members of the Galactic Council, gathered in emergency session. Their forms were as diverse as life itself, crystalline vexor that refracted light in impossible ways, gaseous helions contained within environmental fields, tentacled elections whose movements seemed to defy physics, and dozens of other species he'd only read about in briefings. At the center of it all stood Admiral Keeks Thor, his scales shifting through shades of blue that Rodriguez was learning to interpret as various states of anxiety and hope. The human commander suppressed a smile, remembering their first meeting hours earlier, when he'd offered the Admiral a flask of whiskey and watched the alien's throat ridges ripple in surprise at the burn. Commander Rodriguez, first speaker Vental's multi-toned voice filled the chamber, bringing all side conversations to an immediate halt. "You claim to have encountered this phenomenon before?" Blake nodded, tapping his data pad to life. The holographic display that sprang up showed the same purple-black mass that had the entire galaxy in panic. 6 months ago, we lost contact with Deep Space Research Station Omega. When our rescue ships arrived, they found this. The display shifted to show the anomaly devouring the research station. Several council members turned away, unable to watch. Others leaned forward, their various sensory organs fixed on the destruction with morbid fascination. The quantum readings were unlike anything we'd ever seen, a new voice rang out. Dr. Maya Patel strode into the chamber, her white lab coat contrasting sharply with Rodriguez's military uniform. She moved with the confident grace of someone too focused on their work to care about political niceties. But they were familiar because we'd created something similar in our quantum tunneling experiments. A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Admiral Keeks Thor's scales shifted to a deeper blue as he leaned forward. "Created? You deliberately generated these conditions?" On a much smaller scale, Maya clarified, bringing up another display. "We were trying to find new ways to manipulate space-time. The experiments were controversial, even on Earth." "Reckless," spat an election counselor, their tentacles writhing in agitation. "This is exactly why humans shouldn't be trusted with advanced technology. Your children playing with supernovas." Rodriguez laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. "You're absolutely right. We are reckless. We push boundaries we probably shouldn't. His expression turned serious. But right now, that recklessness might be the only thing that saves your worlds. Maya stepped forward, her hands moving rapidly as she explained. The anomaly isn't just consuming space, it's converting it, shifting it into a different quantum state. We think it's a natural phenomenon, like a black hole, but instead of crushing matter, it's changing its fundamental nature. And you know how to stop it? Keekstor asked, ignoring the outraged whispers around him. Better. Rodriguez's expression turned grave. We know how to redirect it. Dr. Patel and her team have developed a quantum barrier device. It won't destroy the anomaly, but it can guide it away from populated systems. The chamber erupted in chaos. Accusations of human arrogance mixed with desperate questions about the technology. Through it all, Rodriguez stood calmly until First Speaker Vental raised their ceremonial staff, bringing silence. This device, Vental's multi-toned voice resonated through the chamber. What does it require? Maya hesitated, glancing at Rodriguez. He nodded slightly. That's the complicated part, she said. The barrier needs to be alive. It requires direct neural interface with conscious beings to maintain quantum stability. And due to humanity's unique brain structure, a result of our, as you put it, reckless evolution, we're the only species capable of forming that connection. The implications hung heavy in the air. Admiral Keekstor was the first to understand, his scales paling to a ghostly blue. You're suggesting? Yes, Rodriguez's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of what he was about to say. To save your worlds, we need to send human volunteers into the heart of the anomaly. They'll have to remain there, conscious and connected to the barrier, maintaining it for as long as the anomaly exists. Which is? First Speaker Vental asked. Forever, Maya answered softly. The volunteers would be trapped in a quantum stasis, conscious but unchanging, for the rest of time. The chamber fell silent. Not the tense silence of before, but the heavy silence of beings confronting something beyond their understanding. The silence of those who had dismissed humans as primitive, finally realizing what they had failed to see, that sometimes the greatest advancement isn't in technology, but in the willingness to sacrifice everything for others, even those who would never have called you friend. Rodriguez looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, optical sensors, and various sensory organs of each council member in turn. We're not asking for your permission, he said quietly. We're asking for your help. The device needs to be built quickly, and it needs to be built right. We have the plans, but we need your technology, your expertise, and your resources. Admiral Keekstor stepped forward, his scales now pulsing with a color Rodriguez had never seen before. You would do this? Your people would volunteer for eternal consciousness, trapped between moments, to save species that have looked down on you since first contact. Rodriguez smiled, though there was no humor in it. Admiral, if there's one thing you should understand about humans, it's this: we've been sacrificing ourselves to save others since before we invented the wheel. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. The Admiral's throat ridges pulsed with emotion. He turned to the council, his voice carrying the weight of formal declaration. I move that we immediately allocate all necessary resources to this project. The humans have shown us what true advancement looks like. It's time we showed them what true cooperation can achieve. One by one, the council members signaled their agreement. The motion passed unanimously, the first time in recorded history that the Galactic Council had achieved complete consensus on anything. As the chamber emptied and plans began to form, Maya approached Rodriguez. Blake, she said softly, we need to talk about the volunteers. The neural interface, it's going to be more complicated than we initially thought. Rodriguez nodded, already knowing where this was going. How many do we need? 12. The quantum harmonics require a perfect dozen to maintain stability. She paused, her voice dropping even lower. And Blake, they need to be perfectly synchronized. They'll need to be more than just volunteers. They'll need to be a family, he finished for her. They'll need to be a family. The selection. Dr. Maya Patel stood before the holographic displays in her makeshift laboratory aboard Heaven's Reach station, her eyes burning from hours of reviewing neural patterns. The profiles of thousands of human volunteers floated before her, each one representing someone willing to sacrifice their existence for the greater good. The sheer number of volunteers had overwhelmed even the Galactic Council's quantum computers. "You need to rest," Commander Rodriguez's voice came from behind her. He carried 2 cups of coffee, real Earth coffee, one of the few luxuries they'd brought aboard. "Can't," Maya replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "We have less than 60 hours before the anomaly reaches the first populated system. And finding 12 people with compatible neural patterns who can also function as a perfect quantum harmonic unit." She trailed off, taking a long sip of coffee. "About that," Rodriguez said, pulling up a chair. "I have a suggestion you're not going to like." Maya turned to face him, noting the dark circles under his eyes that matched her own. "The Rodriguez family." He nodded slowly. "We're already neurologically compatible, generational quantum entanglement studies proved that years ago. And there are exactly 12 of us who've been through the quantum sensitivity training program." "Blake, no." Maya set down her coffee cup hard enough to splash. "Your family pioneered the quantum tunneling experiments. You're the leading experts in the field. We need you here, working on the barrier technology, not sacrificing ourselves." He smiled sadly. "Maya, we started this. Our experiments, our research, we opened this door. Maybe not this exact phenomenon, but we pushed into quantum territory that everyone else was afraid to explore. If anyone should bear the burden of keeping the galaxy safe, it's us." Before Maya could respond, a soft chime indicated someone at the laboratory door. They turned to see Admiral Keeks Thor entering, his scales shifting through shades of blue and green that they'd learned indicated deep thought. "Commander, Doctor," he greeted them, his 4 auditory canals picking up the tension in the room. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but our quantum analysts have completed their review of the volunteer neural patterns." Maya straightened. "And? Out of all the volunteers, only one group shows the necessary quantum harmonic compatibility." His scales rippled in what they now recognized as apologetic concern. "The Rodriguez family." The laboratory fell silent except for the soft hum of equipment. Maya closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "Of course," she whispered. "It couldn't be anyone else, could it?" Blake stood, moving to one of the displays. With a few taps, 12 profiles appeared, his entire family. "My parents, my siblings, our spouses, all of us have been working with quantum technology for years. The exposure has changed us at a fundamental level." "Commander," Keeks Thor's voice was gentler than they'd ever heard it. "You understand what this means. The neural interface requires absolute consciousness. You and your family will experience every moment of eternity, aware but unable to truly interact, maintaining the quantum barrier that keeps the anomaly at bay." "We understand." A new voice joined the conversation. Maria Rodriguez, Blake's sister and one of Earth's leading quantum physicists, stood in the doorway. Behind her were 10 more people, the entire Rodriguez family. "We've already discussed it." They filed into the laboratory, each of them carrying themselves with the same quiet determination that Blake showed. Maya looked at their faces, faces she'd known for years through their work in quantum research. James and Elena Rodriguez, the parents who had first theorized quantum tunneling. Sophia and Marco, the twins who had built the first successful quantum bridge. Carmen, whose work on neural interfaces had made the barrier possible. And all their spouses, who had joined the family's research over the years. "When did you decide?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. "The moment we saw the anomaly readings," Elena Rodriguez answered, taking her husband's hand. "We knew it would come to this. We've been preparing since we sent Blake to the council." Admiral Keeks Thor's scales shifted rapidly through colors they'd never seen before. You knew. All this time, you knew it would require this sacrifice. James Rodriguez nodded. The quantum mathematics were clear. The only way to contain a quantum conversion event of this scale would be through conscious neural interfaces. And the only humans with the right neural patterns would be those who had worked extensively with quantum technology. We're the ones who pushed these boundaries, Sophia added. We're the ones who showed humanity, and by extension, the galaxy, that these kinds of manipulations were possible. It's our responsibility to make sure they don't destroy everything. The Admiral's throat ridges pulsed with emotion. Your entire family, your entire legacy. Will live on, Marco finished for him. In the barrier that protects the galaxy. In the knowledge we've shared. In the bridges we've built between species. He gestured around the laboratory, where human and alien technology worked in harmony. Maya looked at the displays again, but now she saw more than just neural patterns. She saw game nights and family dinners, remembered conferences where the Rodriguez family had presented their findings as a unit, recalled celebrations of breakthroughs and commiseration over setbacks. They weren't just scientifically compatible, they were a true family, bound by love as much as by quantum entanglement. The interface chambers, she said finally, her voice thick. They'll need to be arranged in a specific configuration. Each of you will need to be placed according to your quantum harmonic frequency. Already done, Carmen spoke up, pulling up a detailed schematic. I've mapped everyone's positions. Mom and Dad at the North and South Poles, the rest of us arranged in complementary pairs around the equatorial plane. Our neural patterns will create a perfect dodecahedral harmony. Blake moved to the center of the room, looking at each family member in turn. Last chance to back out. Once we start the final preparations, there's no turning back. One by one, they stepped forward, forming a circle. Elena spoke for all of them. We've spent our lives pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Now we'll spend eternity protecting what we've found beyond those boundaries. Together. Admiral Keeks Thor watched this human family, these beings his people had once dismissed as primitive, as they prepared to make a sacrifice beyond comprehension. His scales shifted to a deep purple, a color reserved for moments of profound spiritual significance. I'll inform the Council, he said softly. We'll begin the final modifications to the barrier device immediately. As the Admiral left, Maya looked at the Rodriguez family, her colleagues, her friends, soon to become the guardians of the galaxy. We have work to do, she said, bringing up the neural interface specifications. And not much time to do it. The next hours would be crucial. They needed to modify the interface chambers to accommodate each family member's specific neural pattern, calibrate the quantum harmonics to match their combined frequencies, and prepare both their bodies and minds for an eternity of conscious stasis. But as Maya watched them work together, finishing each other's sentences and moving in unconscious synchronization, she realized that in a way, they had been preparing for this their entire lives. The Rodriguez family had always existed at the edge of what was possible, pushing into the unknown not for glory or power, but for the simple human desire to understand and protect. Now they would become something unprecedented, a human quantum barrier, 12 consciousnesses working as one to hold back the darkness. Their sacrifice would reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the anomaly continued its inexorable advance, unaware that it was about to meet the most powerful force in the universe, a family united in purpose, bound by love, and ready to give everything to protect not just their own species, but all species. The countdown to eternity had begun. The construction. Heaven's Reach station had never seen anything like it. The massive circular construction bay, normally used for building capital ships, now housed the most ambitious engineering project in galactic history. The quantum barrier device grew like a crystalline flower, its dozen neural interface chambers arranged in a perfect dodecahedron around a core that seemed to swallow light itself. But it wasn't just the device that was unprecedented, it was the cooperation. Species that had barely exchanged pleasantries for millennia now worked side by side, their different approaches to problems creating both friction and unexpected breakthroughs. No, no, and no. Maya Patel's voice echoed across the bay as she rushed toward a team of election engineers, her lab coat fluttering behind her. The quantum coils need to be asymmetrical. Your perfect geometric patterns will tear the whole thing apart. The elections, their tentacles waving in agitation, began to argue, but then something remarkable happened. Carmen Rodriguez, her neural interface calibration equipment still attached to her temples, stepped forward and pulled up a holographic simulation. "Look," she said, manipulating the display with practiced ease. "Your symmetrical patterns are beautiful, and they're based on sound mathematical principles. But quantum mechanics doesn't care about beauty, it cares about harmony." She adjusted the simulation, showing how the asymmetrical coils created a more stable field. Sometimes imperfection is perfect. The elections watched, their tentacles gradually stilling as understanding dawned. One of them, a senior engineer, reached out with a delicate appendage and modified the simulation further, combining their precise mathematical approach with the human intuition for quantum instability. "Like jazz," the election said, surprising everyone. At their confused looks, the engineer's color shifted to what passed for embarrassment in their species. "I've been studying human music. Jazz embraces imperfection to create something greater than perfection could achieve." From his observation post high above the construction bay, Admiral Keekstor watched this exchange with fascination. Commander Blake Rodriguez stood beside him, both of them taking a rare moment of rest as they supervised the organized chaos below. "Your people continue to surprise us," Keekstor said, his scales shifting through thoughtful shades of blue. "We've spent millennia perfecting our technologies, refining them to their purest forms. Yet in less than a week, you've shown us that sometimes the flaws are what make things work." Blake smiled, pulling out his ever-present flask of whiskey. "That's humanity in a nutshell, Admiral. We're messy, we're imperfect, and we make it work anyway." He offered the flask. "Speaking of imperfect things that work." The Admiral accepted with what had become a familiar gesture, his throat ridges rippling at the burn of the liquid. Below them, a human engineer had climbed onto a Vexor's crystalline shoulders to reach a high connection point, while nearby, a Hellion was teaching a group of humans their species' traditional pre-work meditation. "How are the interface chambers coming along?" Keekstor asked, his tone growing more serious. Blake's expression tightened slightly. "Maya and Carmen think they've solved the consciousness stabilization issue. They're incorporating music into the quantum field, specific frequencies that match each family member's neural patterns. The Helians helped with that, actually. Turns out their gaseous forms are naturally attuned to quantum harmonics." Before the Admiral could respond, an alarm blared through the station. Within moments, Maya's voice came over the comm system, "We need all senior staff in Quantum Lab 1 immediately. We've got a problem with the neural synergy matrix." The scene they found in the lab was tense. Elena Rodriguez lay in a prototype interface chamber, her neural patterns displayed on floating screens above her. The readings were chaotic, spikes of activity threatening to break through the containment fields. "What happened?" Blake demanded, rushing to his mother's side. "The quantum harmonics are fighting each other," Maya explained, her fingers flying over control panels. "When we try to sync more than two people, the patterns start to degrade. At this rate, we'll never get all 12 to harmonize." James Rodriguez, watching his wife's readings with worried eyes, suddenly straightened. "The music," he said. "We're thinking about it wrong. We're trying to force 12 separate patterns to sync, but what if?" He turned to the election engineer who had mentioned jazz earlier. "What if instead of a symphony, we make it a jazz band?" The election's tentacles curled in thought. Each player independent but contributing to a greater whole. "Exactly." Carmen jumped in, already modifying the harmonics. "Instead of forcing everyone to play the same note, we let each person play their own part of the melody. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The Rodriguez family took turns in the prototype chamber while engineers from a dozen species worked to modify the quantum harmonics. The Helians contributed their understanding of natural resonance, the Vexer added their expertise in crystalline harmonics, and the Elections brought their mathematical precision to bear. Slowly, the chaos began to resolve into harmony. Elena's neural pattern stabilized, then strengthened as James was brought online in a second chamber. One by one, they added more family members, each contribution making the quantum melody more complex but more stable. "It's working," Maya whispered, watching the patterns dance across her screens. "It's actually working." But their triumph was short-lived. Another alarm cut through the lab, this one coming from the station's long-range sensors. Lieutenant Vor's voice, tight with tension, filled the room. "The anomaly has accelerated again. New estimated time to contact with the Centauri cluster, 36 hours. Admiral Keeks Thor's scales paled. "How long until the barrier device is ready?" Maya and Carmen exchanged looks, running quick calculations. "With the new harmonics solution, 38 hours. Maybe 37 if everything goes perfectly." "Not good enough," Blake said, his voice hard with determination. "We need to cut that time. What can we strip out? What's not absolutely essential?" "The safety protocols," Sofia Rodriguez suggested quietly. All eyes turned to her. "The fail-safes, the backup systems, everything designed to protect us during the transition. If we remove those..." "No," Maya started to protest, but Elena cut her off. "We're going to spend eternity in those chambers anyway," James's wife said, her voice gentle but firm. "A few extra moments of discomfort at the beginning won't matter in the long run." Blake looked at his family, seeing the same resolve in all their faces. Then he turned to the Admiral. "We need every engineer you can spare. And we need them to understand, from this moment on, we throw out the rulebook. No more careful testing, no more redundant checks. We build, we install, and we pray it holds together." Keeks Thor's scales shifted through colors so quickly they became a blur. Then he straightened to his full height, his voice carrying the full authority of his rank. "Attention all personnel. As of this moment, I am declaring Protocol 0. All safety regulations are suspended. All resources are to be redirected to the barrier device. Anyone who isn't directly contributing to the construction is to evacuate the station immediately." A murmur ran through the assembled engineers. Protocol 0 was legendary, it had only been declared twice in the history of the Galactic Council, both times in the face of extinction-level events. "One more thing," the Admiral added, his voice softening slightly. "Whatever happens in the next 36 hours will be remembered for as long as our civilizations exist. Let us make sure they remember not just the sacrifice, but the unity that made it possible." As the room erupted into activity, Blake found himself standing next to Maya. She gripped his arm hard enough to hurt. "This is going to be rough," she said quietly. "Without the safety protocols, the neural interface, it's going to be excruciating." Blake watched his family as they prepared to return to the prototype chambers for more testing. They moved with purpose, supporting each other, sharing quiet words and gentle touches. In less than 2 days, they would begin an eternal vigil to save a galaxy that had barely accepted their existence. "We can handle rough," he said finally. "We're human. Rough is what we do best." Above them, through the station's massive windows, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if bearing witness to what was about to unfold. The greatest engineering project in galactic history was about to become a race against time, with 12 human lives and billions of others hanging in the balance. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity could really do when pushed to its absolute limits. The sacrifice. Time, Admiral Keeks Thor had learned, was a peculiar thing. In his centuries of service, he had seen it stretch and compress, had watched moments expand into eternities and hours vanish like quantum particles. But never had he experienced anything like these final minutes aboard Heaven's Reach station. The quantum barrier device loomed before them, its 12 neural interface chambers arranged in their perfect dodecahedral pattern around the central core. Each chamber, designed to house a member of the Rodriguez family, looked unsettlingly like a crystalline coffin. The comparison, Keeksthor knew, was more apt than he cared to admit. "Final systems check," Maya Patel announced, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Neural interfaces at 100% capacity. Quantum field stabilizers online. Musical harmonics synchronized." She paused, looking at the readouts. "It's as ready as it's going to be." The anomaly was now visible to the naked eye through the station's windows, a churning mass of purple-black energy that seemed to devour the very stars themselves. They had managed to shave precious hours off the construction time, but it had still come down to the wire. The first tendrils of the quantum distortion would reach the Centauri cluster in less than an hour. Commander Blake Rodriguez stood before his assembled family, looking at each of them in turn. They wore simple white suits designed to interface with the chambers, their neural calibration devices glowing softly at their temples. Despite everything, they smiled at him, the same smiles he had seen at family dinners, graduations, weddings. "I know we've all said our private goodbyes," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to say one more thing. What we're about to do, it's not just about saving lives. It's about showing the galaxy what humanity really is. We're not just the newest members of the Council. We're not just the reckless children they think we are. We're the ones who look into the darkness and say, 'Not today.'" Elena Rodriguez, her gray hair shimmering under the quantum lights, stepped forward to embrace her son. One by one, the family came together in a final group hug. No more words were needed, they had said everything that mattered in the quiet moments between tests and calibrations. "It's time," Maya said softly. The Rodriguez family separated, each moving to their designated chamber. The order of entry had been calculated down to the microsecond. They needed to achieve quantum synchronization in perfect sequence to establish the barrier. James and Elena, the parents who had started it all with their first quantum tunneling experiments, entered first. Their chambers sealed with a soft hiss, neural interfaces connecting with quiet clicks. On the monitoring stations, their brainwave patterns appeared as dancing lines of light, already beginning to harmonize with each other. Next came the twins, Sophia and Marco, their perfectly matched quantum signatures sliding into place like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. Then Carmen and her wife Sarah, their love story having literally transcended quantum mechanics. One by one, the chambers accepted their occupants, each new consciousness adding another layer to the complex harmony they were building. Blake was last. Before entering his chamber, he turned to Maya and Admiral Keeksthor. "Remember," he said, managing a small smile, "humans are stubborn. Don't give up on us." The final chamber sealed. For a moment, everything was still. Then the quantum core began to pulse with light, the neural patterns of all 12 family members swirling together in a display that brought tears to the eyes of every being present. Neural synchronization at 95%. 97%. 99%. Maya's voice shook as she read the numbers. Full quantum harmony achieved. Initiating barrier generation. The effect was immediate and stunning. A wave of energy pulsed out from the device, visible as a ripple in spacetime itself. It met the approaching anomaly like a wall of light meeting a sea of darkness. For one terrible moment, it seemed like it might not be enough. The anomaly pushed against the barrier, its purple-black tendrils seeking any weakness. The neural patterns on the monitoring stations fluctuated wildly as the Rodriguez family fought to maintain their connection. Then something extraordinary happened. Music began to emanate from the quantum core, not the calculated harmonics they had programmed, but something new. It was jazz, pure human jazz, improvised in the quantum realm by 12 minds working as one. The barrier stabilized, strengthened, and began to push the anomaly back. It's working, Maya whispered, then louder, it's working. The anomaly is being redirected. Through the station's windows, they watched as the massive purple-black mass began to curve away from the Centauri cluster, following the path laid out by the quantum barrier. The Rodriguez family had done it, they had saved billions of lives. But the cost was now becoming clear. The neural monitoring stations showed 12 fully conscious minds, their thoughts and emotions interwoven into a single quantum symphony. They were aware, alert, and would remain so for eternity, their consciousness suspended in an endless moment as they maintained the barrier that protected the galaxy. Admiral Keeks Thor's scales shifted through colors that had no names in any language as he watched the miracle unfold. The Council will want to study this, he said finally. They'll want to understand how it works, try to replicate it. No, Maya cut him off, her voice firm. This station and this device are now a sanctuary. The Rodriguez family has given everything to save us all. The least we can do is protect them and honor their sacrifice. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, his throat ridges pulsing with emotion. Then he straightened, his scales settling into a deep, royal purple. By my authority as Admiral of the Galactic Fleet, I hereby designate Heaven's Reach Station as a protected memorial site. No research, no experiments, just honor and remembrance. As if in response, the music from the quantum core changed, becoming something soft and sweet, a lullaby that Elena used to sing to her children, now transformed into a quantum melody that brought tears to every eye in the control room. In the years that followed, Heaven's Reach Station became a symbol of everything humanity had brought to the galactic community. Species that had once looked down on humans now came to pay their respects, to leave offerings, and to listen to the ever-changing quantum music that emanated from the barrier device. The Rodriguez family had become legend, 12 humans who chose to sacrifice their existence to save not just their own species, but all species. Their story was told in schools across the galaxy, a reminder that true advancement wasn't measured in technology or power, but in the capacity for sacrifice and love. And in the quantum realm, 12 consciousness danced together in an eternal moment, their love for each other and for life itself transformed into a barrier that held back the darkness. They were awake, aware, and together, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity wasn't just the newest member of the galactic community, they were its heart, its conscience, and now, its eternal guardians. For in the end, it wasn't humanity's recklessness that had saved them all. It was their boundless capacity for love, sacrifice, and hope, qualities that no amount of technological advancement could replicate. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a purple-black anomaly continued its journey into the void, guided away from all life by a barrier made of pure human consciousness, maintained by a family whose sacrifice would be remembered until the last star burned out. The galaxy would never be the same.